What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get
Running
to it.
gear. Braking system. All versions of the Tiguan have non-alternative 312mm disc brake rotors at the front and 282mm rotors at the rear, with simple and reliable TDI or Lucas single-piston calipers. As with all brakes with a floating bracket, you need to pay extra attention to the condition of the pins, but so far only the oldest. Cars and copies after off-road enthusiasts, which among Tiguan owners are very few. Rear calipers have a traditional trouble with souring of parking brake mechanism, and in case of electric handbrake the drive can also fail. In the original it is not cheap and pulls on 130 to 150 euros. Non-original can be found of acceptable quality for about 50, and the minimum prices start at about 30. You can consider it quite budgetary. 6 years ago it was a problem, but now you can solve the problem very inexpensively. Replacing the cables will cost more. True, the quality of work of electric actuators of Chinese production can be low. The clamping force and the time of operation will be significantly different from the factory version. With a resource of pads and rotors without surprises, at mileage 100 plus and with pre-selective automatic transmission it is possible to meet still native rotors and even pads. With a conventional automatic, it is more difficult to get such brake life. It is worth paying attention to the ABS unit operation. At one time, excessive attention was drawn to the problem of wheel disinhibition on bumps and in a turn in these cars, which resulted in numerous experiments with reflashing of ABS unit, attempts to enable launch control, anti-rollback, ESP functions, and just firmware. Updates relatively often cause purely software problems in blocks. Now there is a good experience in customization of non-standard configurations and upgrades, but still it is worth to check the software versions and blocks carefully, if you do not want surprises. Suspension. The front McPherson at Tiguan is resourceful enough, if not to be carried away by all roading and to drive on good roads, or to choose a correct trajectory. Almost all components live up to 100,000 mileage. Only stabilizer rods of the transverse stability stabilizer and rear support of the lever give up earlier. After this boundary it will be necessary to shake all globally, preferably with replacement of subframe silent blocks, and if you do not want to get into suspension again at mileage 130 to 150, then with replacement of supports and shock absorbers at the same time. And do not forget to prepare a set of bolts. Traditionally for Volkswagen they are made of plasticine, and rusting. The rear support of the front arm suffers a lot for those who like to attack curbs and potholes. The tuning, with installation of one-piece support from Audi Q3 RS and other reinforced variants, is still popular, but they drastically reduce comfort due to a very detailed transmission of all road trifles to the body and steering. It is interesting that the lever itself and a ball bearing can quite pass shock absorbers which at many quite live up to 200,000 of mileage if not to pick on steering. From nuances it is still worth to remember that a lot of unnecessary noise is connected with a stabilizer of transverse stability. The slightest backlash of its bushings, and in a salon full sensation of the suspension collapsed at all, and they are officially changed only as an assembly. In practice, the installation is mastered on glue and with a handmade bracket, allowing to clamp the rubber insert well. And one more thing, condition of springs is very important for stabilizer life, and they in Tiguan sag a few centimeters by 5 years of operation almost always. The rear suspension is noticeably more complicated than the front one, and its resource strongly depends on the average load. At eternally empty cars with city operation the suspension goes and goes, but those who really use possibilities of a crossover on transportation of cargoes and passengers can be dissatisfied. The first knocks begin after 50,000, but usually are eliminated by replacement of stabilizer struts and lower external ball bearings. They are floating silent blocks on garage terminology. Often incorrectly installed cross-stabilizer rod and broken fasteners create a good foundation for expensive and frequent repairs in the future. And spring sagging, to the progressive delamination of the longitudinal arm silent block. As a result, at 100,000, even the careful owners will almost certainly have a large repair. Rarely anyone manages to postpone it for runs 120 to 150, unless you drive purely on the highway with a very good asphalt. A big repair for the rear suspension is about 100 to 130 euros worth of parts, including the silent blocks of the upper crooked arm, lower support arm, longitudinal arm, subframe, as well as the bushings of the rear cross stabilizer, its links, camber bolts, and almost all other fasteners. The work will take about the same amount of time. It is desirable to replace the springs. They also actively sag. In those who like to load the car with the top can even break off the outermost coils. Resource of hub bearings is quite decent now, and in cars before restyling they often started to howl at mileage up to 50, mostly rear ones failed. Now the problem concerns only cars on non-standard tires with large outreach and miraculously preserved low-mileage prairie-styled cars with native bearings. Steering with EPS is not capricious in general. Racks on Tiguan are made by VW itself APABS series with a belt in the drive. If the dust covers of the rack are intact and the software of the amplifier is updated in time, it does not cause troubles up to the mileage of about 200,000. However, it is very sensitive to the quality of onboard power supply, so a tired battery is the cause of most failures. Failures of the rack itself are usually related to the failure of the torque sensor or jammed power drive due to ingress of dirt and water. The life of the screwball nut pair in the powertrain depends on the loads and is generally limited. In case of poor lubrication, in machines from hot regions the lubricant often leaks through the dust covers and in very cold regions. It freezes, or water ingress, noise, and vibrations appear during operation. And then the motor starts to shut down due to overheating or excessive load, or the drive belt comes off. It is considered to be a good tone to replace the lubricant in the rack at a mileage of about 100,000 to prevent future problems. But, as usual, only a few people service the car, and there is usually no confidence in the mileage. Detail original price of non-original 2 braking system front brake pads 3 248 84 649 ASIN 514 rear. Brake pads 2 564 82 802 Fenix 772 brake disc front 312 by 25 3 734 84 676 Febi 3 102 brake disc rear 282 by 12 2 497 83 398 Febi 3 379 Detail original price of non-original 2 suspension and transmission front L-arm 11 489 Lemfeder 4031 Febi 5 493 rear support arm 4015 Lemfeder 1 561 Febi 1 565 front shock absorber 8 773 Monroe 4 628 Boge 5 437 ball bearing. Steel arm 2 765 Lemfeder 2033 AS metal 742 front hub 6 903 FAG 4 387 SKF 4 194 rear crossmember silent block lower arm outer 680 Febi 490 GKN 600 transmission. General problems: most of our cars are four-wheel drive, but front-wheel drive is about a quarter of the population. There are no serious miscalculations in design, and everything is good with spare parts. There is a wide choice of both new and used parts. The bulk of the breakdowns of ball joints is associated with damage to the covers. The second group of troubles concerns those who have a 2.0 motor accelerated to 300 plus forces and 400 plus torque. Luncheon is switched on and banal strength of drives and cardan shaft is not enough. But their loud voice should not be taken into account. Those who are engaged in tuning point by point, and not comprehensively, those, simply speaking, are guilty themselves. Mechanical boxes' 6-speed manual transmissions are quite strong, but they are not often found, mainly with 1.4 motors, where their safety margin is huge. The main problem is associated with the dual-mass flywheel and its resource. There are cars where the flywheel knocks, with a mileage of about 100,000, but there is little confidence in its authenticity. As a rule, problems in this part come closer to 200,000. Automatic boxes Hydromechanics, the section with automatics, will have to be reduced. After all, we already have a very detailed story about problems of ASIN TF60 boxes on our site. Very detailed story they are far from eternal, if you do not change oil often and leave the stock cooling system. But if you have a normal radiator instead of a heat exchanger, external filter, and frequent oil changes, their life can please old-school enthusiasts. It easily passes its 350 plus, even if to be engaged in improvements at the first calls or after the first repair of the hydrolock at the mileage of about 100 to 120,000. In cars with service strictly according to the regulations, and with city operation, one can count only on these very 100 to 120,000 of normal operation. Further, jerks and errors will inevitably begin. And it is good, if it will cost only cleaning of the hydroblock and cleaning a replacement of the most loaded solenoids. After all, often on overheated automatic transmissions rubber piston tears, and it will require more serious repair. 7-speed robot pre-selective robots here are only with clutches in an oil bath, DQ250 and DQ500. They were put on Tiguan mainly after restyling. By the way, on Tiguan there are rare variants of these boxes under the bell housing of 1.4 TSI motors, which are very appreciated by fans of tuning of any VW cars to replace dry DQ200. It is clear that such variants are in short supply. But in general, pre-selectives of these series are perfectly repairable. Let's start with the newer and torquey automatic transmission, the 7-speed DQ500. On the Tiguan, they are used only in all-wheel drive variants, which are designated 0BH or 0 deciliters. This 7-speed robot originally appeared with powerful diesel motors, but already by the time of the restyling of the Tiguan it began to be put with much less torquey motors. The reason is both in general high resource of clutches and mechanical part, and in more convenient gear ratios for movement in city mode. All the same 6 gears for robotized automatic transmission with a powerful engine turned out to be not enough. Either the revolutions are overestimated when moving at speeds of 110 to 130 km per hour, or too large ratio at the start causes high wear of clutches. These boxes are considered to be very reliable. On commercial vehicles they often do not require replacement of clutches up to mileage 250 to 300,000 km, and with regular oil and filter replacement serve quite reliably. But with mass application on passenger cars there are more problems. Not least because of the higher temperature when paired with gasoline engines, and because of the many fans of tuning motors EA888 and EA189 series. Boxes manufactured between the 27th of May, 2013 and the 14th of November, 2014 have a problem with the third gear synchronizer lock ring, which should be repaired under warranty or collants. The date of manufacture of the box is written right on the box, in the front top of the clutch housing. Noise when shifting from second or fourth gear to third gear is a definite reason to replace the box. The problem with the synchronizer of the third gear, not directly related to the above-mentioned defect of the ring, one of the most popular problems of the box. And the search for a solution to the problem is clearly led by the manufacturer himself. This element of the design has changed significantly since 2010. The first, second, and third gears here are the most forceful and are used as often as possible, while the second and the first almost do not have quick shifts down, and their synchronizers are less loaded, as well as the fourth. And the material of the first 3-cone version, brass, which allowed to make the gear engagement faster, but reduce the life of the synchronizer. In the future, the synchronizer became steel single cone, and the life has obviously become longer. Fork bearings are a serious problem. As in the first revision dry DSG DQ200, they are made with bearings that have balls and a bad habit of falling apart, crumbling the mechanics when a ball hits it. Increased load due to problems with the third gear synchronizer causes very frequent problems with the 3 to 7 gear fork. But the others can also fail. It's just that this one is loaded the most. One more unpleasant trouble is connected with rubbing of oil supply tube due to the slightest play of differential bearings. A frayed tube very quickly leads to problems with clutch pack lubrication and a huge amount of steel shavings from the rings getting into the oil system. It is difficult to call the differential weak, but it is easy to roll it when forcing the motor and annealing. Mechanically, the box has almost no serious flaws. Improved oil pump, larger clutch, optimized lubrication system with reduced consumption by lubricating only the shaft currently loaded. Improved filtration, and general optimization of mechatronics in comparison with the previous DQ250 transmission allowed to create. A very strong box with hydraulic drive costs less than 3 kilowatts at the highest load. But, unfortunately, all the disadvantages of the idea itself are present. Oil in this automatic transmission acts both as a working body of the hydraulic system and as a lubricating and cooling component for the mechanical part. Of course, accumulation of wear products of the mechanical part in the hydraulic fluid negatively affects the work of hydraulics. And here the wear products are not only friction cardboard, but also wear elements of synchronizers, gear clutches, shafts themselves. Many components of such debris are magnets, and therefore have a significant impact on the operation of solenoids. Of course, the box has a lot of catching magnets both on the body of the internal filter and in other parts, as many as 2 filters. And one external replaceable, but this does not completely solve the problem of saturation of oil with wear products, especially if you adhere to the official service regulations, once in 60,000. The extensive use of plastic in mechatronic construction makes it extremely sensitive to operation with prolonged overheating. The wiring is looped in boxes, and over time the plastic becomes more brittle. And this increases the chances of breakage both when the box is assembled and disassembled, and during operation. Theoretically, there should be additives in the oil to prevent aging of plastic, but in practice, the older the box, the higher the chances of failure of electronic components manufactured by Continental. There are special additives that reduce the chances of plastic breakage in such conditions, but pouring them into the box oil is somewhat dangerous, so usually mechatronic is treated with special compositions only in the disassembled state. In addition to plastic, rubber seals, of which there are many in hydraulics, also age. Plungers in mechatronics have a bad habit of scuffing when working with dirty oil. And while solenoids can be simply replaced, plungers will have to be replaced with repair plungers, with complex channel boring work, or the installation of repair sleeves. Unlike solenoids, plungers cannot be pulled out on a standard hydraulic bench. Special adapters will have to be put in. And visual inspection may not reveal specific problems such as plunger geometry changes without scoring. It is because of such cases that sometimes the mechatronic has to be replaced as an assembly. The exchange fund for these mechatronics is 1.5 or 2 times more expensive than for DQ200 and starts from €220, and the compatibility of different variants is worse. But they are repaired better and cheaper. And let's not forget another important component, the engine's dual mass flywheel. This too is a wear component, and is responsible for many of the unpleasant knocks and thumps that occur when the DQ500 is running. The low operating speeds of the engine contribute to its early wear. High torque tuning motors do too. Often, quite strong jolts and jerks when shifting at low revs are the result of flywheel wear, not the DSG itself. What is pleasant? The box is perfectly diagnosable. If we are talking about the mass scanner VCDs, you can see the time of operation of the automatic transmission at different temperatures. In the ranges 0 to 90, 90 to 100, and 10, 110 to 120, 120-130, 130-140 and the maximum oil temperature. The number of temperature exceeding 170 and 160 degrees. It is possible to look at strokes of forks of gear inclusion. It should be 8 mm, as well as on the predecessor, any deviations. Not to good. Here or wear of forks, or wear of synchronizers. You can check the condition of the clutches, to assess several indirect indicators, which quite accurately convey the overall picture. Parasitic torque in the open state is assessed, which speaks of mechanical problems of the box or excessively thick oil. Clutch engagement pressure is also checked, which can indirectly speak about their wear, the current of linear solenoids of clutch. Engagement and base pressure adjustment and adaptation data, which allows you to draw conclusions about the state of the control system and the reserve of adjustments. 6-speed robot. The older DQ256 speed gearbox looks simpler in comparison with the DQ500. It has a noticeably weaker mechanical part, which leads to much more widespread problems with differential and shaft bearing failures. There are plenty of magnets in this box too. There are on the internal filter and forks, but the weak differential supplies a lot of shavings. The ball bearing of the primary shaft from SKF failed often, and the others are standard with plastic cages, so they are afraid not only of wear, but also of overheating. There were also childhood diseases in the form of wear of the oil pump cover at mileage of 150 plus, or long operation with dirty oil. And low life of oil seals, most likely, also because of dirty oil. Corrosion of the mechatronic cover as an anecdotal nuisance already. The shafts are quite weak. The small primary shaft gears wear badly, not helped by the large width, which with dirty oil only helps wear. The gear forks don't break here, although the bearing design is the same as the early DQ500, and DQ200 for that matter, and potentially dangerous to the box if broken. On the plus side compared to the DQ500, less weight, size and cost. Now 250th DSG can be bought almost cheaper than 200th box, and it is still able to withstand motors with power over 400 forces, and, in general, with competent maintenance it is very reliable. Especially if you are not lazy and put a reinforced differential, better with self-lock. Such variants for DQ250 are available, and the price is not exorbitant, because the product is mass Four-wheel drive all-wheel drive is realized by an angular gearbox on the gearbox and a clutch of connection type Haldex 4 until November 2013, and after Haldex V. The manufacturer recommends to service the clutch every 60,000 kilometers, but actually this is the limit mileage. The pump will not say thank you for sure. In case of active winter operation, even if the oil is changed every 30,000 kilometers, it will be dirty, saturated with friction. Wear products and pump wear products. Moreover, only the filter and oil are changed. Cleaning of the pump grid is not included in the regulations. In practice, it is also very useful to do it. By the way, it is convenient to squeeze out the filter in the fourth Haldex by activating the clutch pump with a scanner. You can break the housing with pliers and leave a bunch of plastic in the system. It is easier and more convenient to service the fifth Haldex, but you need to do it even more often. It does not have a hydraulic accumulator, and the wear of the pump is much more intensive. As a result, the oil ages faster, and the reaction time of the system increases with mileage. With the same regulations, it is better to reduce the real mileage between oil changes in the clutch by 2 times, only if you change it at every maintenance, it will be relatively clean, and the reaction time of the clutch will be close to the new one. With changes already every 20k and typical winter use in 2.0 motors, the oil is saturated with dust. There are already tuning kits with an external filter and oil reservoir for the fifth Haldex. Oils for different generations of Haldex are different, and the original is quite expensive, €25 for 800 milliliters. If you search, you can find analogues with tolerances for Haldex, significantly cheaper. Motors. General problems. There are no serious general problems, except for the density of the layout and complexity of the units. The engines themselves are very compact, but the volume of attachments is very large, so the engine compartment, which could fit VR6 or even a 5, is cramped. And complexity also implies a high cost of engines and attachments. There is a huge number of elements, which owners of Japanese atmospherics with simple injection have not even heard of. Comparatively small resource of engine supports, and their strong influence on the level of comfort is rather a peculiarity. As is the dense arrangement of the cooling system with the indispensable on cars of this class of quick-release couplings which creates the first difficulties already in 5 years of operation. Some attention should be paid to the presence of tuning and other improvements, as well as versions of firmware and all attachments. There can be a lot of improvements, not only firmware, but also custom pipes, intake, exhaust, and so on. Gasoline engines. The main mass of Tiguan gasoline. These are various variants of 2.0 TSI motors of the EA888 family, as well as 1.4 TSI, represented by 2 families EA111 and EA211. And the first one is also divided into variants with a simple turbine and with a double supercharger, which differ from each other very much. Of course, the EA888 family is not homogeneous either. The Tiguan was equipped with representatives of Gen 1 and Gen 2 families. The first generation includes CAWB Kawa CCTA series motors, the second, CCZA, CCZB, CCZC. They are compatible with each other to a limited extent. The diameters of crankshaft journals, cylinder block wall thickness, fuel injectors, vacuum pumps, oil pumps and control units differ. 2.0 TSI. Since 2.0 TSI motors are the most popular, we will start with them on the problems with this family in general and the piston group revisions on the Gen 2 engines. There are 2 articles on the problems of this family in general and on piston group revisions on Gen 2 engines. It makes sense to read them if you're planning to buy one. At this point, the number of Gen 2 engines that have received a revised piston group has seriously increased. On average, the cost of overhaul with replacement of timing and pistons with the recommended ones and elimination of problems with the camshaft support usually falls within €1,500 to €1,700. The number of copies, where it is possible to make a very cheap repair with reaming of oil drain holes in the piston, has decreased to about 0. Severely damaged motors cannot be repaired in this way. They will have uneven wear of both piston and liner, not only piston rings. Of course, enthusiasts are trying, and even boring of the hole for the oil ring some workshops have put on stream. But the quality of such repairs will now clearly be unsatisfactory, and given the price of even a minimal set of spare parts in the form of gaskets, it is not economically viable. Unless garage masters will leave all the old gaskets, put on seal and everything that can be, do not change the oil seals and the entire timing. To make such for sale are skillful, If you see the price of overhaul in 30,000 rubles, it is just such a case. The buyer's task in this case is to detect such quality repairs in time. Sometimes oil appetite in motors, even with unsuccessful piston group, can be cured without overhaul, or it can be at least seriously reduced to quite reasonable 200 to 300 milliliters per 1,000 kilometers with the help of cracking. But the trouble is that folk methods with Dimexide are not suitable for the motor. It has a painted timing cover and a very weak oil pressure sensor, and the chain softeners are afraid of Dimexide, they delaminate. But less aggressive preparations can quite successfully return the mobility of piston rings. Only beforehand it is necessary to wash the intake and combustion chambers with water supply, change oil caps and revision of VKG and turbine. There are plenty of examples of successful decracking, although as a guaranteed method of recovery it is not suitable. And no one gives guarantees even after successful decoking, because all preconditions for corrosion remain, they are embedded in the design. Otherwise, EA888 has the same set of problems. The first generation has a lot of troubles with the timing gear, if it is not replaced completely. Problems with balance aligners and camshaft support, phaser regulator, and camshaft bed scoring are not uncommon. A lot of small problems with the injection system, crankcase ventilation, and supercharging. Turbines could have already used up most of their life, and the chances of breakdowns have already increased. At mileage 150 plus motors should already have at least a replaced timing with modifications, removed balancer nets, often with replacement of camshaft with eaten drive of the fuel injector, the fuel injector itself, replaced fuel ramps or pressure sensors, and in the Russian countryside with poor fuel quality, also a low pressure pump and injectors. Almost certainly replaced or require replacement of hot turbine parts due to cracks around the Vastigate valve and burnouts. Usually a brace is also put on the Westgate actuator to eliminate rattling. However, such tuning is also popular at lower mileages. For a motor that does not consume oil and has no other problems, now the cost of work to replace the timing is 120 to 150 euros, and the price of spare parts, 220 to 250. In a specialized service turnkey can come out to 300 and even a little less. So, a large discrepancy in camshaft positions, fixed by a diagnostic scanner, is just a reason for bargaining. Another of the regular and non-critical breakdowns is the pump. Its plastic housing cracks before the bearings wear out. Usually the original serves for about 80 to 100,000 kilometers, and then regular replacements of non-originals begin. There are complaints on reliability even on Herpu and Pierberg. By the way, the impeller with a bearing can be bought separately, but the problem is in the pump housing, which at the same time stands and the thermostat. Unfortunately, there are no metal housings for these motors yet. Replacement of the oil separator and crankcase ventilation valve is in fact part of the maintenance for owners of cars with 2.0 TSI, as well as regular inspection of the condition of the fuel injector tappet roller. 1.4 TSI engines of the EA111 family, which a few years ago were generally reviled and now experiencing a renaissance of sorts. Spare parts have become much cheaper, in particular, timing components, new front cover and even the piston group. And the experience of operation, at last, has been accumulated decent. As a result, 122 horsepower Caxa with a single supercharger, if serviced by an experienced mechanic, in general, can be considered. A motor strong enough, and problems, inexpensively solvable. Even taking into account a small tuning. If the timing is of the latest type, the condition of the intercooler and electric pump is monitored, the gasoline is 98 or 100. They do not try to save on oil and intervals of its replacement. These engines are more economical in operation than Korean or Japanese. Large atmospheric engines with 150 plus HP, and in terms of dynamics in most modes they surpass them. Resource in general, of course, is moderate, 350,000 on a piston group at usual operation, but they are well repairable, and, as long as the power system is good, no scuffing. Even with MKP such motor easily gives out average consumption in Moscow within 8 liters, and on the highway it is possible to manage. In 5, if competently use cruise control. Until 2015, a 150 horsepower version of the EA111 motor with double supercharging was available on the Tiguan. There is a relatively large turbine, and at low revs the motor is supercharged with a Roots-type compressor. This combination allows to get a good response at low speeds and high power at the expense of a large turbine. But the complexity of this solution is obvious. The intake tract is switched between the two compressors with the help of flaps, and even the use of a simpler air-to-air intercooler does not make the system simpler and more reliable. The drive itself is not without its drawbacks, and these were described in the article linked above. But the saddest thing is that the timing and piston group were not ready for such power. A typical owner, who does not bother with good gasoline and frequent maintenance, will consume oil in liters, pistons will burn out and chain will jump. There were a lot of such motors on Tiguan, and the fame about them was quite bad. Most likely, the problems with chain jumping have been solved now, and the overhaul has been done, most likely, if the motor had an oil appetite. But this engine requires high culture of service, and for a mass family car, moreover, a heavy and Labastny crossover, is not good enough. The average load is too high. Tiguan with such engine can be bought only fully understanding how complex and demanding such system is. And even with low fuel consumption you are unlikely to get serious savings. But for enthusiasts it is quite an interesting motor, with a tax of 150 horsepower, in motors before restyling, if you do an overhaul with the installation of forged piston and reduced compressor pulley, with increased intercooler, you can get more than enough 200 to 240 HP with very low fuel consumption and acceptable reliability. And without all the fuss of EA888 family motors with timing and balances. The Tiguan also has two 1.4 TSI engines of the next EA211 family. CZDB 125 horsepower motor is rare. It was put from May 2014 to the very end of production. It doesn't have the oil appetite problems of the earlier motors in this family, and is objectively the most reliable engine on the Tiguan in general, while being the most inexpensive to maintain. Let's add here the turbine IHI RHF3 with a very good reserve on productivity. It was put both on 150 horsepower and on 160 horsepower versions, and the firmware for 95 th gasoline. And there is no system of cylinder deactivation. The timing is simple. From troubles only capricious electric turbine actuator and weak gaskets of the pump housing, which itself, fortunately, is metal. CZDA 150 horsepower motor differs from CZDB mainly in firmware. It is more sensitive to fuel quality, and due to the use of DSG it is always more loaded. In general, it remains also very reliable and inexpensive in operation, but driven motors of this family are also found. It is not surprising. On the expanses of the internet you can easily find convinced fans of 92 grade gasoline, supporters of oil replacement. Strictly according to the regulations, fans of very strange oils and fuel at reduced prices. A big plus for the buyer is the choice. There are a lot of cars with such motors, so you can cut off junk. Its fuel consumption is as ridiculous, and dynamics already confidently allows you to go less than 10 seconds to 100. And by the totality of characteristics, this is the most successful engine on this car. Diesel engines on cars before restyling diesel could be chosen to get a powerful enough and at the same time reliable motor without oil appetite. Besides, 140 horsepower variant was completed with usual Aisin automatic transmission that added to its popularity. So, mainly diesel cars in our country are represented by EA189 motors in 2.0 and 140 horsepower version of CBAB CFFB series. All other diesels are very rare. These are variants with balancer shafts in the crankcase and turbines BV43 J1874 KXB419 or BV40 J1874 KCB340. Their turbines are strong. The hexagon of the oil pump drive does not wear out either. The first engines of 2009 delivery year are. In the risk group, they were not officially delivered to us before, and since November 2009 the motors have a modernized oil pump. And 100 mm hexagon of the drive. The injectors here are usually alive, as long as the fuel injector is alive and there is no overheating, up to about 250 to 300,000 mileage. 2 booster pumps are also strong, as long as the fuel is good and filters are replaced. The crankcase gas ventilation system with 4 microcyclones exemplarily reliably filters oil. The EGR valve is located after the DPF filter and is equipped with a gas cooling system. As a result it can work efficiently and does not pollute the intake much. With Cellgate firmware it is really not a bad motor, but it's a pity that many of them received a forced update. As a result, they lost normal dynamics, got extra 2 liters of fuel consumption and at the same time a lot of problems with EGR valve wear, clogged intake manifold flap wedge, turbine wear, including hot snail, and on European imported cars, with permanently clogged particulate filter. At the same time, the update itself could go with a lot of errors, because in addition to updating the software, these series of motors had to change some series of injectors, put inlet dissipators, quenchers, recalibrate turbines. And the additional work was not always done. Rollback of software updates in standard online mode is, alas, impossible. In general, the motor is more reliable than the EA888 gasoline engines, but in terms of cost of operation it's hard to make a preference right now. With low mileage it is definitely better than all gasoline engines except EA211, but if the mileage is 200 plus and the firmware is new, the situation can be the opposite. It breaks down less often, consumes less fuel, but at high mileage, typical for diesels, it can cause a lot of problems, and their solution can be more expensive than a typical overhaul of a gasoline. With careful diagnostics it is not a problem, but the scanner does not see the full picture, and no seller will not allow you to disassemble the intake. Detail original price of non-original 2-engine radiator, 19293 Termal 3854 Nissan 7091 timing chain. 2.0 TSI 5 783 Febi 4 533 H2 227 chain tensioner 3 745 CGA 1 210 timing belt kit 2.0 TDI 12 941 Daco 8 747 senior 9 290 timing belt kit with pump 2.0 TSI not available SKF 9 745 all 4 motors 11937 2.0 TSI 17 824 17 819 Hitachi 2020 Bosch 10 916 with DSG, old 1.4 EA 111, as well as 2.0 EA 888. As you can see, there are no unsolvable problems, everything can be done, and if the cost of the car is more than 1 million rubles, such investments are quite justified. With diesels too, and the intervention is usually needed at very high mileage. Well, with the new 1.4 EA211 you can not even think about any analogs and bypass technologies. As of the end of 2020, there are still enough cars with this engine and low mileage, able to drive a couple or 3 years without special investments. In conclusion, choosing between the Volkswagen Tiguan I's DSG and hydromechanical transmissions, as well as the TSI and TDI engines, ultimately depends on your driving preferences and lifestyle. The DSG offers a sportier, more responsive experience, while the hydromechanical option provides a smoother ride, especially in city driving. On the engine front, the TSI is ideal for those seeking a balance of performance and efficiency, while the TDI appeals to those prioritizing fuel economy and torque. Weighing these factors will help you make an informed decision that best suits your needs. Thank you for watching, and we hope this guide has helped clarify your options with the Volkswagen Tiguan I.